What is the abolition of man? Well, if you want to be literal about it, or at least historical about it, it's a book or a series of talks given by C.S. Lewis in 1943. The abolition of man are subtitled Reflections on on Education with special references to teaching English in the upper forms of schools. This was C.S. Lewis's critique of education and where it was going. Many have said that this is a prophetic text. It's hard not to believe that when you read it, especially when you compare it and join it with his, excuse me, with his book, That Hideous Strength, which was an allegory based on the abolition of man. And what it does is it uses that starting point, or this upper forms, pardon me, this critique on education in 1943 and where it was going, as an objective defense of objective value and natural law, as well as a warning about the consequences of doing away with these two things. What C.S. Lewis was talking about was that he was talking about wokeism. He was talking about the ability or the possibility that people would take their values and say, well, my value is as good as yours. My truth is as good as yours. No matter what the outcome of living my truth may do to me or to others, because it is mine, it is just as valuable as any objective truth, right? The Abolition of Man by C.S. Lewis defends man's power over nature as something worth pursuing, but criticizes the use of it to debunk values, the value of science itself being among them. In recent years, we've seen science used as a religion. We've seen science say, well, you just need to trust in the science. You need to trust what the science tells you. And as we've seen from Air Fauci, right? Many people are deeming themselves the science without observing the scientific method, without gathering all of the data, and they're using that to control people or to manipulate people in many different ways. Now, how does this all connect? So if you clicked on my thumbnail, it was not clickbait. I'm going to tie The Abolition of Man by C.S. Lewis to OU's Strategic Research Verticals, which is an ESG WEF inspired document that sets the goal of blurring boundaries or crossing boundaries of what a university would normally do in order to attain a unified global identity that eliminates the identity of Oklahoma, that eliminates the identity of the United States of America, that eliminates the identity of all nation states, and unifies them behind one singular religious style value, which is couched in environmentalism, in the search for creating equity. So this is all ESG, the environmental, right? The social, which is social justice, and governance, which is the most important part, because that is how they will control you using these mechanisms. So when C.S. Lewis was talking about the breakdown of values, right? When he was talking about the breakdown of values and moral relativism, meaning that if my value is mine, so therefore because it is mine, it is my way of knowing, it is just as good for society and good for you as it is for me, and you have no right to critique it. Now keep in mind that C.S. Lewis was doing this through a critique on education and where he saw education going, right? So when he gave his series of talks on the critique of education, he did as C.S. Lewis did well. He took that story, or he took that premise, and he implanted it into a sci-fi novel, basically. Now, if you want to, don't misconstrue what I'm saying here. That because the novel that we're going to talk about, That Hideous Strength, talks about aliens and all kinds of things. It was a sci-fi novel, but it was an allegory, a tale, a fanciful tale to illustrate what he saw coming in a very practical manner in the United States of America. So I'm going to take you to, and I just want you, I'm going to read you some sections of That Hideous Strength. I'm going to read you parts of the story that we've already seen today. Okay? And I'm not going to make any drastic pronouncements other than you take in the text that I'm going to bring you from C.S. Lewis and That Hideous Strength, and you tell me, you garner for yourself whether or not you have seen this play out today, or if you're seeing it play out today. Okay? So let's go up here. So I did this. If you look at the date right here, I did this Twitter thread in May 15th of this year. After a good friend of mine said, UnWokable, you need to read this book because it illustrates in exactly what we're seeing today on a multiple different levels. Okay, so I'm going to take you through this. By the way, like, subscribe, share the video. Super chats are open if you want to jump in. I would love to have some discussion on this and even challenge me, call me nuts, whatever you want to do, but let's take it right at the face value. So if you'd like to super chat in, that would be greatly appreciated. And I want to couch one last thing before I jump into this. If I've been any benefit to my community, which some would say I absolutely have not, but that's fine. It's that I stay ahead of the curve as opposed to being on the curve. Because, as That Hideous Strength will illustrate here today, the people in power benefit from you focusing on the bright, shiny thing. And that bright, shiny thing that grabs your attention, right, will stop you from focusing on what you need to focus on now to actually fix the problem. Here's an example for my local people in Oklahoma. The issue of the books in school has been going on since last year. There were bills brought forward to try to deal with it then. They weren't passed. But at least since July, they've been at the forefront of people's minds. What I'm telling you here, what I'm going to take you to through the end of this stream, is what you need to be focusing on now. Yes, we need to put up a fight against the book in schools, but that is just a symptom of the problem. And any disease specialist, any portion any medical doctor or anybody who actually fixes problems for a living will tell you that simply focusing on the symptoms of the problem in an outsized manner. So, for example, if you have chronic pain in your back due to a slipped disc, you can be given an opioid to fix the pain, right? The opioid will fix the pain while you are under the influence of that opioid, but it will not fix the problem. It will not stop what is happening from happening. And as I've said many, many times, the issue in all of these situations can be followed to one point in a local manner, which is your universities. Your universities have set out a strategic goal, as I'll show you and I've shown you in other streams, to gather influence within your community in order to transform that community out of its local identity. So many of you have heard me say, and this has actually gotten much play by other people literally repeating my words since I started saying this, which is great, fine. The trans issue with kids, or the queer theory issue. Queer theory is a political identity. Queerness is a political identity. Anti-racism is a political identity that seeks to remove your individual identity and transplant it with a political identity. That's what teachers are doing in school now in order to make kids activists, so that if you disagree with that kid and their politics, you're disagreeing with who they see as their true selves, because they've wrapped their entire identity into politics. No, but not just politics, but political viewpoints, policies. Do you support abortion or not? Well, if you do support abortion, that's a part of your political identity. Do you support the ability for kids to transition as kids before turning 18 using hormones and surgeries? Well, if they're being taught that it's moral that kids must be able to do that, and they imbibe that as part of their identity, what are they going to do when you disagree with them? They're going to violently turn away from you. They're going to hate you if you're a parent. That's the same thing that we're seeing with the University of Oklahoma and the state of Oklahoma. Make no mistake, the goal of the University of Oklahoma is to make the state, the community for which it resides, bend to its will, bend to its identity. And it has a literal entire team of people across all disciplines devoted to crossing boundaries, as I've said to you before and will show you again, of what a university normally does into businesses, into policies, and transplanting the identity of that community, of this state, with a global political identity. That is the goal of the University of Oklahoma. It is its almost singular goal now. And make no mistake, there is giant amounts of money wrapped up into this, garnered by people who live in your community and are pretending to have an issue with critical race theory or queer theory or the transitioning of kids or any of those things. Literally, they're pretending to have an issue with that, using their power, influence, and money to get you to focus on the bright, shiny symptom of the problem, while they continue to embed this into your community and call anyone who calls it out insane, a conspiracy theorist. And Vivek Ramaswamy, who I'll show you a short clip of, who has picked up on a little bit of this. He's one of them who has literally taken my words, which is fine. That's fine. And I know that he looks at my stuff because he likes my stuff and he retweets it. He's retweeted several of my things, even about the University of Oklahoma. An incredibly intelligent man and an incredibly insightful person about ESG, and someone who's trying to fight back ESG. But he talks about, he tweeted the other day about how exactly what I just described, which is that people who talk about, quote unquote, the Great Reset or the ESG, which the Great ESG is the lifeblood of the Great Reset, per the WEF. They've said this. This is not something that is made up. Okay. But he says that people who talk about this will be called conspiracy theorists. And we're talking about a billionaire who is on Fox News all the time. He's on other news channels. He's written books. He's been in the software industry. He knows what he's talking about. And he literally quoted me. If you watched my stream the other day about OU and the strategic research verticals, he quoted what I found about the blurring of boundaries. So let me before I go into all of that, I will get there. I want to take you from C.S. Lewis's Abolition of Man, which we already talked about, which was the basis for his novel, That Hideous Strength. That Hideous Strength is an allegory, a sci-fi novel meant to illustrate graphically in an entertaining way what he believed and foresaw education happening, or saw happening in education. Okay? So I'm going to read you this, and you tell me if C.S. Lewis had a point. You tell me if you've seen any of this in your daily life over the last 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years, but especially in the last 4. And then I'll make the connection to what he's talking about here directly to the University of Oklahoma. In their own words. I'm not going to make anything up. I'm going to read you what they say and what they say their goals are. And then I'm going to make the case that, yes, we should have a group of people focusing on getting books out of schools and things like that. But it should not be our primary focus, or at least should not be the outsized focus. We need it just as loud of a activist movement toward reforming and reclaiming universities, because they're no longer higher education institutions. They are castles of wokeism designed to spread, to conquer everything around them and bridge out. And we have at least 2, more like every university, but at least 2, OSU and OU, who dominate our landscape culturally, that have committed themselves to this, to doing this in their own words. But let's take you back to That Hideous Strength by C.S. Lewis. So here you go. This is just from sections of this. And to lay the groundwork, Mark, who is a university professor, has been contacted by a group of people through the group NICE. And NICE has a goal of taking over society by having man conquer man through education and through manipulation of media and propaganda. So I'll take you through this. This is happening today. That Hideous Strength by C.S. Lewis. But since the trouble was bound to come, there was, and this is quoting from the NICE handler of Mark, who is the professor, okay, describing to him what NICE is doing and what they will continue to do through media, through education, and how that will progress. So I'm reading the story here. This is page 115 of That Hideous Strength. You mean she herself is the disturbance, said Mark. Yes, said Bilostrato, his little eyes glistening above his fat cheeks. It's all fair and square, said Miss Hardcastle. You can put a few 100,000 imported workmen. And so what they're talking about here is a movement or disturbances within media, okay, to manipulate the populace. And they're talking about a little college town, Edstow, okay? And he says here, you mean you've engineered the disturbances, said Mark? To do him justice, his mind was reeling from this new revelation, nor was he aware of any decision to conceal his state of mind. In this snugness of and intimacy of that circle of the people he was talking to, he found his facial muscles and his voice, without any conscious violation, taking on the tone of his colleague. That's a crude way to put it, said Mr. Feverstone. So there's talking about engineering disturbances. So that's the first part of this. And Mark asks, what is this all for? Emergency regulations. You'll never get the powers we want at Edstow, which is the town, the college town, until the government declares a state of emergency exists there. And the stuff must be ready to appear in the papers the very day after the riots. Okay? So Mark is talking to this group of people, and they're talking about engineering social unrest within municipalities. So, Norman, I'll ask you this. Remember what happened when defunding the police happened, and you had a group of people who've never been around Norman that much come down and yell and scream at the city council until they got what they wanted, based upon riots happening all over the country? And the same thing happening over and over and over again, especially in college towns? So I'm going to read this. It said that's a crude way of putting it. So they're talking about social engineering or putting this into the media. It makes no difference, said Florestano. This is how things have to be managed. Quite, said Mrs. Hardcastle. It's always done. Anyone who knows police work will tell you, and I say the real thing, the big riot must take place within the next 48 hours. It's nice to get the tip straight from the horse's mouth, said Mark. So Mark is he's a social scientist who's going to start writing media. He's going to start writing news stories about what's happening. And it's hardly affect her. In the meantime, you've got to keep, you and I have got to keep, you and I have got to get busy about the account of the riot, meaning that they have to, in the story, have to take what is being engineered and put it into the media and spin the story as to why the riot's happening. But Mark says, what is it all for? Emergency regulations, said Feverstone. You'll never get the powers we want at Edstow in the college town until the government declares a state of emergency exists here. Exactly. It is folly to talk of peaceful revolutions. It's folly to talk about peaceful revolutions. So all of the social unrest, the outrage over the books in schools, the outrage over defunding the police, and as I've told you over and over and over again, defunding the police was not about defunding the police. In every municipality that was done, it's been refunded because they've had to. But what they got out of it was a removal of police who wouldn't bend and take orders for orders' sake. And they got control of the hiring and the firing and the recruitment of those municipalities and those police departments. The same thing is happening with teachers in schools. They used outrage over several different, over anti-equity, over anti-racism, over many different things to implant DEI offices. This happened in Norman, Oklahoma, ladies and gentlemen. And they were very proud of it until I started calling it out for what it was. And now they've done away with that department, with that executive director, because they've already done their job and they renamed it Student Services. But they have control over the hiring and the recruitment. And they use the outrage and the spin on the outrage to gain control of the institutions. That's what they're describing here. Mark, the protagonist in this, or the main character, who is a college professor, is a social scientist being recruited to write news stories to manipulate the mind of man towards a political goal of a revolution to take over institutions. But it's not even done yet. Here they describe what they will have to do in education before, during, and after that. This is the main point of this. The third problem is man, and I'm quoting this. So this is C.S. Lewis 32. Man has to take charge of man. The third problem is man itself. Man has to take charge of man. That means remember that some men have to take charge of the rest, which is another reason for cashing in on it as soon as we can. What do I mean cashing in on it? The outrage and the spin in the media. You and I want to be the people who do the taking charge, not the ones who are taking charge of. Quite. What sort of things do you have in mind? Said Mark. Quite simple and obvious things. At first, sterilization of the unfit, liquidation of backwards races. So this is eugenics. This is, again, I'm quoting a book here, YouTube, by C.S. Lewis, before anybody tries to knock me down. Quite simple, the most obvious things. First, the sterilization of the unfit. Transitioning kids at a young age surgically or using hormone therapies sterilizes them. Does it not? Yes, it does. If you medically transition a child or give them medicines or hormones that are used to chemically castrate criminals, what do you think that will do to the kids? It will sterilize them. Quite simple and obvious things. At first, the sterilization of the unfit, and I'm quoting here again. Then the real education, including prenatal education. By real education, I mean one that has no take it or leave it nonsense. A real education makes the patient who wants it, a real education makes the patient what it wants infallibly. That means the education makes it's indoctrination, right? A real education makes the patient what it wants infallibly. Education meant to make the educated what it wants infallibly. Whatever he or his parents tried to do about it. I'm going to read this to you again. This is from C.S. Lewis's That Hideous Strength. A real education makes the patient what it wants infallibly. This is now being done today by social emotional learning. Whatever he or his parents tried to do about it. Of course, the education will have to be mainly psychological at first, but we'll get on to the biochemical conditioning in the end and direct manipulation of the brain. A new type of man. And it's people like you who've got to begin to make it happen. And so what NICE and this scientific global community in this story is talking about is that the first part of the education is psychological, done through outrage, through manipulation of the media. This is C.S. Lewis, That Hideous Strength. Through manipulation of the media to set people up for accepting things to go back to normal. That's what C.S. Lewis is talking about here. So I'll read this again. They're talking about the process. They're talking to Mark, who is a social scientist, who they're now getting to write news stories in the newspaper about riots that they have engineered in a college town to get that to change policies, basically create a problem to fix the problem. Right? Create a problem to fix the problem. And then the real education, to quote it again, begins. Then the real education begins. And I'll just show you, by real education, I mean one that has no take it or leave it nonsense, meaning that this is not education that you can just say, well, I agree with this and I don't. No, we're going to socially and emotionally learn you, indoctrinate you into accepting this as a moral belief. Because if you were dare to abandon it, you will be an outcast of society. A real education makes the patient what it wants infallibly, whatever he or his parents tried to do about it. Of course, it'll have to be mainly psychological at first, but we'll get on to biochemical conditioning and in the end, a direct manipulation of the brain. If you manipulate the hormones of kids, that's a biochemical condition. If you make them believe that they can turn from a biological male into a biological female, and then you give them the hormones and the surgery to do that, that's biochemical conditioning. Moving forward with this, but this is stupendous, said Feverstone. It's the real thing at last, a new type of man. And it's people like you who've got to begin to make it happen. So when he's saying people like you, Mark, you social scientist who were going to get to write news stories, you have to manipulate the mind of man in order to prime them into outrage over all kinds of different things, left and right, in order to prep them into accepting solutions, predetermined solutions that they would never normally accept. They would not normally accept. Make them fed up with the police department. Say that thousands of Black people are being killed when it's only 9 over the course of a year. Manipulate the people in order to accept a predetermined outcome. That's what he's talking about here. That's what C.S. Lewis is sorry. Whoa, goodness. That's what C.S. Lewis is getting you to understand. Sorry, my thing reset. So now, it's not done. No, this is just a few examples in That Hideous Strength that should ring very true to you for you today. You're what we need. This is the people of the regime in the book talking to Mark, the social scientist, about what they need to do to manipulate the people in order to prep them for this. You're what we need. A trained sociologist with a radically realistic outlook, not afraid of responsibility. We want you to write it down, to camouflage it. Only for the present, of course. Once things get going, we shan't have the bother about the great heart of the public. Now, bringing this back to the abolition of man, what C.S. Lewis argued was that the Tao, or what men and humanity deemed as morally good and objectively true, rooted in nature, should not be messed with and given to subjectivity about what those universal truths are. And so when they talk about the great heart of the public, meaning that they will scare them, make them outraged, turn them against each other, manufacture all kinds of different systemic problems that don't exist using data and news sources and institutions like the New York Times or Fox News even, or MSNBC, or any method that they can to mess and alter the mind of man, right? And get them to accept outcomes that they wouldn't normally accept. By altering the great heart of the public, meaning what they value, making them forget that just 5 years ago, accepting a top-down education overhaul was beyond the pale. Making them forget that 5 years ago, the thought of defunding the police was an absolute insane thought. But it happened because they riled people up. They stuck them all in front of the television for 2 weeks. And then what happened? Giant protests, riots that extended all the way through January. The thesis of the social justice riots was met with the antithesis of the January 6th, and the people in between were us, the public. And it primed us for the solutions. Moving forward. But in the meantime, it does make a difference how things are put. So they're talking about the actual manipulation here. You mustn't experiment on children. So this is their example. And this should hit home, ladies and gentlemen, about what you are seeing today with the transition surgeries and why it is that even though this is still happening in the state of Oklahoma today, that you had an entire ruling class of people helped by conservative media to make you think it's not happening in Oklahoma because one hospital agreed to stop doing it until they got their money to build the apparatus to do it. So listen to this. So this is from another portion. In the meantime, it does make a difference how you put things. So they're talking about the propaganda. Think social emotional learning when you listen to this. Quoting, "You mustn't experiment on children, but offer the dear little kiddies free education in the experimental school attached to the NICE, which is the institution, which is WEF or the United Nations, UNESCO, or experimental schools. You take that where you want. And it's all correct." So I'm going to read this point. This is what the NICE director is telling Mark, who's the social psychologist or the social engineer that's going to be writing this propaganda into papers and into, it's a partnership of science, business, and government with social psychology. Which again, if you listen to my last podcast on OU and the WEF, they say this, and I'll show you that again. They say this explicitly. What is being described here? So I'm just going to read this section. This is the regime talking to the person who they're meaning to be a propagandist in the media, who is a social scientist. "No, we want you to write it down to camouflage it, only for the present, of course. Once things get going, we shan't have to bother about the great heart of the British public. We make the great heart what we want it to be. We make the great heart what we want it to be. But in the meantime, it does make sense But in the meantime, it does make a difference how things are put. For instance, if it were even whispered that the NICE, which is the global organization here, wanted powers to experiment on criminals, you'd have all the old women of both sexes up in arms yapping about humanity. Call it re-education of the maladjusted, and you have them all slobbering with delight that the brutal era of redistributive punishment has at last come to an end. Odd thing it is, the words experiment is unpopular. The word experiment is unpopular, but not the word experimental. So what they're saying is the odd thing is the word experiment is unpopular, but not the word experimental. You mustn't experiment on children, but offer the dear little kiddies free education in an experimental school attached to the NICE organization, company, corporation, and it's all correct. So basically it's saying we can accomplish our goal of re-educating society through children by renaming what we're doing nice things called social emotional learning. Literally nice things called social emotional learning. We can rename what it is that we're trying to do, which is a public-private partnership of schools and school systems, by calling it choice. Knew I'd lose some watchers right there. I'm sorry, but you have to look at it for what it is. And I'm going to tell you, Republicans, your cognitive dissonance on accepting a unification of an outsized influence on corporations over your schooling of your kids is insanity. Just because you like the people pushing the message, and just because they have an R in front of their name or they claim to be unwoke doesn't mean anything. They're playing on your tribalism. And your kids will pay the price for it because they're going to call it everything good. They're going to be very nice about it. But what they're doing is using social emotional learning. I don't care if it's called Hope Rising as social emotional learning. It's still the goal to manipulate your kid's psyche in a very nice way. And they may say it has Christian values. It doesn't matter. It's not a school's job to teach values. That's parents' jobs. So any form of social emotional learning, ladies and gentlemen, I don't care who's running it. I don't care if the governor of Oklahoma's best friend is on the board pushing it. I don't care. What they want to do is make money because it's going to be a data mining. It's going to be a data mining process. It's already proven. They're going to unify, and your choices are going to be basically multiple choice of all the same answers. You may go 5 years with having all kinds of new kinds of schools popping up, right? But I will remind you, especially my boomers, my Gen Xers, and my older millennials, of this. Especially boomers, though. Listen, you remember having all of the smaller stores available to you, the mom and pop shops. But Walmart, McDonald's, Amazon, all of these giant corporations started grabbing up the market and killing off the smaller stores. And that will happen with your private schools as well. You will have Amazon and Apple and Google and all of these companies being brought into red states with great fanfare because they're going to bring a lot of money. They're going to implant their data into schools. They're going to put people on the school boards that they want. And they're going to kill off the mom and pop schools. And then your choice will turn into, oh, I can pick the Apple school. I can pick the Walmart school. I can pick the Amazon school. But all of them are going to be mining your data. Because as James Lindsay says, data is the new oil. Think about your phone just for 1 second. Think about your phone. You used to pay for minutes, right? They don't care how much you talk on your phone now. You used to pay by text message. They don't care how much you text. What do you get charged for? Data. Your data. And when they say, oh, let the money follow the child. That means a whole different thing when you talk about data mining. And who's going to have access to that data based upon a contract you signed to go? You signed to go to a school that is not subject to the transparency of a public school. You will sign NDAs and not know it. When you sign to go to this beautiful, awesome school that offers the greatest sports program or the greatest music program, and teachers are paid $100,000 a year. Why will teachers be able to be paid? Because the money they're going to be making on your children through the data that's harvested from them in the schools that you cannot check because it's not a public school. This is you may not like it, but look for yourself and see if I'm right. It's called a public-private partnership. Look up what that means. Monetizing children is all the rage these days. It is. So if you look at this, I want to take you back and I'll connect this to the University of Oklahoma and what they're doing. Here's slide number 4. Of course, the education, have to be mainly psychological at first. But we'll get on to the biochemical conditioning in the end and the direct manipulation of the brain. From That Hideous Strength, C.S. Lewis. Now, I'm going to show you what OU has to say about this. And you make the connection. I'm just going to read YouTube. I'm just going to read what I'm just going to read what they talk about. So here's OU's again. I did a whole thing on this, the strategic research framework and what they call convergence, a vision of transdisciplinary research and creative activity with lasting social impact at the University of Oklahoma. Don't let that gobbledygook go past you. Take that sentence for when they talk about convergence. Transdisciplinary, or they're always using the word trans and transformation. Research and creative activity. So what they mean is active with a lasting social impact at the University of Oklahoma and beyond, because they'll say that. And again, I'll read you what he says here, who's Tomas Diaz de la Rubia, Vice President of Research and Partnerships at the University of Oklahoma. When we succeed in moving beyond traditional boundaries, collaborating across disciplines with policymakers and business leaders, and I'm right here, by the way, to create new knowledge and drive convergent solutions, that impact global challenges, we will no doubt succeed in our ambition to leave the world as a better place. Everything else will follow. Now, remember what I said about, or what C.S. Lewis said in The Abolition of Man about creating a new man. This is not pie in the sky. This is not conspiracy theory. I'm going to read you what they say. This is from the University of Oklahoma. This is not a conspiracy theory. Right here. This is page 29. This is page 29. Human-computer teaming. And I'm reading right here. This is OU's Strategic Research Verticals. Human-computer teaming, a critical problem space for data-enabled research. Data-enabled research is the efficient and effective integration. What does the word integration mean? It means to fuse. Okay? So I'm when we stop and we hit these sanitized words, I'm going to remind you of their meaning. Human-computer teaming, a critical problem space for data-enabled research, is the effective and efficient integration of humans and complex machines. The effective integration of humans and complex machines. Effectively blending human and machine capabilities while accounting for the unique strengths and limitations of both will enable us to address complex problems, such as environmental climate change, which is number one on their list of verticals here, as equity and social justice, anti-racism. That's the S in ESG. Those are the complex problems. Effectively blending human and machine capabilities while accounting for the unique strengths and limitations of both will enable us to address complex problems, such as introducing autonomous vehicles to roadways, disaster recovery, and medical diagnostics. Okay, seems fairly. Over the last 25 years, discovery in cognitive neuroscience. Okay, so they're talking about the mapping and the neuroscience of the brain. Over the last 25 years, discoveries in cognitive neuroscience and technological advancements in machine learning have led to new insights into underlying capabilities needed to support effective human-computer teams and overcome the limited contextual knowledge, cognitive inflexibility, and opaqueness of AI and ML. So, artificial intelligence and machine learning. Transforming intelligent machines from tools to teammates. Requires cognitive and computational models of beliefs, desires, intentionality, and capabilities. So what they're trying to do, and make no mistake, it's not just Elon Musk has already talked about that he sees that there will be some fusion of the brain with your devices, for example. This is not, you can find videos of it. I could throw them up. That is something, Mr. Beast for YouTube, the largest YouTube, one of the largest YouTube people, talked about how as soon as this is made possible, he will do it because it'll be worth the money because it'll make you super intelligent. So YouTube, don't ban me. I mean, I've got 5 viewers right now. So, transforming intelligent machines from tools to teammates requires cognitive and computational models of beliefs, desires, intentionality, and capabilities. Our approach draws on the expertise of cognitive psychologists, device engineers, human factors engineers, decision-making and risk perception researchers, user experience researchers, and computer scientists. Each supplies unique insights into how humans work in teams, in team science and process design. Many aspects of society can benefit from improvements in human-computer teaming. So human-computer teaming, what do you take that as? They literally tell you what it is. OU researchers are well positioned to address these challenges, given the existing strengths and collaborations of AI and ML specialists and social scientists. Go back to what I was talking about with That Hideous Strength. Cognitive and social psychologists, computer scientists, human factors engineers, and medical researchers, scientists and engineers. And then it goes into collaborative data, driven discovery, decision-making environment, visual analytics. This is all at the University of Oklahoma through a process they call, sorry, it's a long document, convergence, a vision for transdisciplinary research, creative activity, and lasting social impact of the University of Oklahoma. And here is your ESG model right here. Look. Climate change, E. S. G. Governance. All unified. So now I'm going to go on my soapbox for just one moment. Governor Stitt made giant protestations about how he was anti-ESG. He has not done a damn thing about this process at his flagship university. In fact, he has named people purposefully whose only mission it is to create this to the Board of Regents. That's what he's done. He's named people whose only mission is to create this to the OU Board of Regents. And he's not done so ignorantly. At a certain point, but his only fix for all of the problem when it comes to the books, and this is the, let me make one last connection. The books you see in schools that everybody's railing about and doing podcasts over and writing bills about, it's the back pain that, and the bills that you're writing are the opioids. The bills you're writing will actually end up hurting you more than the pain does, because you are using them to avoid the problem. You've got to go in and fix the disc. And I've not seen, I don't care who you are, I don't care how many great things you've done in the House and the Senate in Oklahoma. I don't care if you're my friend or not. There's been nobody with the balls enough to go after the University of Oklahoma. And until you do, you're all cowards to me. Because you're smarter than I am. You know where the problem lies. And all of you have avoided this. Some of you have actively helped it while claiming that you're trying to stop it. We have to stop taking the opioid, focusing on the pain of the problem as opposed to what's causing the pain of the problem. The books in schools are the pain. Social emotional learning and everything that we're seeing, critical race theory, are the pain of the problem. The slip disc, the broken back, is the university that's systemically pushing it all the way down. From the administrators, the teachers, the policy advisors, the professional development, and everyone who I know have done things to actively avoid dealing with that problem. Why? Because there's lots of money to be made, ladies and gentlemen. There's lots and lots of money to be made. Because data is the new oil. And if the ESG market is going to phase out the money made off of fossil fuels, which Governor Stitt said that he's so proud that 40% of renewables and all, right? Data is the new oil. And you and your kids are the well. Data is the new oil, and you and your kids are the well. As James, and I'm going to attribute James Lindsay. Data is the new oil. My edition, you and your kids are the well. And your schools, public and private, and especially public fused with private, are the actual pumps, the drills. So, and social emotional learning is the tool to make everybody an open well. They're going to change the great heart of the American and the world public, just like C.S. Lewis said in That Hideous Strength and in the Abolition of Man. They're going to change your values using drastic riots and media manipulations and pinning you between a thesis and an antithesis, driving you nuts, begging, making you beg for normalcy, and then hand you the solution on a silver platter. The predetermined solution that makes what they want, which is the redefining of your identity, of your kids' identity, of your community's identity, of your city's identity, of your state's identity, of your country's identity, with one solidarity-driven, unified, communal goal. Environmental, climate change, climate justice, right here, right here. This is OU. Social and community transformation, that's the ESG. Health and the future of health, which is how they control you. Environmental is the macro. Right? The global. Society and community transformation, social justice, that's the community. Health, that's the individual. And aerospace and defense, human computer teaming, they're just going to make sure that they can watch you wherever you go, whenever you go, down to the point of knowing what you might even think or predicting it. That's what social emotional learning, because the more data they mine from you, the more they know about you. And their algorithms can literally predict what it is that you will want, do, say, think, or what you might want for your kids. And then what they can do is socially nudge you with that data using what's in your hand into going into, I don't know, a Starbucks, for example. It's like, oh, I'm feeling kind of tired. They can, if you, the Fitbit on your arm, right? They can monitor your heart rate, your energy level. And then boom, up comes a ad on your phone about Starbucks. And boom, you've just been socially nudged to get a pick-me-up from Starbucks. That's why data is the new oil. It's the Wikipedia snippet. It is the end of any sort of privacy. And it's not a conspiracy theory. So I will tell you this. to my friends out there who are solely focused on one very small symptom of the problem. I desperately ask you to join me, help me, not take from me, but help me put a focus on where the problem is coming from, if you actually want to fix it. I've worked in administrations my whole life. I've worked in the bureaucracy of universities and schools. I have more educational experience than almost anybody you've talked to that you see on, I don't care if they're parents or teachers or parents and teachers. I'm telling you where the problem's at. And I'm telling you that there's been a concerted effort by the people who are doing this, claiming to help you, to discredit me and make my life harder because of me telling you this. And the simple act of me saying that makes me look crazy. And I mention it offhand because I could go in and just lay it all out, right? But then I become the story. What I'm trying to get you to focus on, I'm only bringing that up to say, look, here is a tiny bit of proof that the people who are going to make money off of this are trying to discredit me, which proves that what I'm saying is right. Because otherwise, why wouldn't they just ignore me? Why actively go after me? These are OU's strategic research verticals. These are the people who run them. And here are the teams of people all the way down here who are dedicated to transforming society one step at a time. There's one for each group. And they bridge all from journalism right here to honors colleges to education. This is not a conspiracy. There are people who are dedicated and getting paid for it. We've got to do something. We've got to do something. It's vastly getting to the point where I don't know how much longer I'm going to be able to do this. So if you want to support me, please, super thanks, super chat. But opportunities have been taken. Nobody else is telling you this. So I would appreciate your support. Subscribe to my Substack. Make a donation. Super thanks, super likes. Anything you could do would be very appreciated. I'm looking for sponsors for my channel if you're interested. That would be very helpful. I would read your ads on the show, just like you see on the Daily Wire and things. But nobody else is telling you this stuff. I venture to say there'll be somebody that takes it and repackages it and tells you later, which is fine. But I appreciate your support. Like, subscribe, share the channel, hit the bell. And stay UnWokable. don't let the abolition of man become a reality. Stop focusing on the bright, shiny thing, or don't stop. Take some focus from the bright, shiny thing and look at the whole picture. In an active way, apply pressure to the people you like, to the officials you elected, that you rallied for, that you held signs for. Make them do the right thing. Make them actually represent you. Don't let them get away with lying to you by making you focus on the bright, shiny thing and writing bills that are redundant and will only stop the pain in your mind, but not in reality. Anything short of a complete overhaul of the university system. At this point, if we'd have started 2 years ago, like I tried to get people to do, what you're seeing now might have worked. Nope, not anymore. It's going to take something more drastic. And people will have to lose money. So that's what I got. I'm coming back later, 4 p.m. with Eye Inside the Classroom. Got a story coming out there about Utah and connecting that to OU. So watch us then, 4 p.m. And we'll see you then. Thanks, guys.